But the first shock of existence, the realization of death presses us inside and activates our ascension, activates our descent into the depths, activates our gnosis, activates our knowing, activates what we call our anthro-ontological knowing. Anthro, human being, like anthropology. Ontological, for reals, is what we really know. Anthro-ontology is the great new field. So the first shock of existence historically is the realization early in history that we were going to die, right? It's the death of the human being. So the realization of the death of the human being, not just the physical fact of death, but the existential realization of death, which probably takes place early in the hunter-gatherer era. You know, people used to think, right, that it happened in farming, right, was agricultural, agrarian. All right, David Graeber has written a very, very good book called The Dawn of Everything, where he affirms what I've long thought and talked about and what many of the interior scientists say, that actually death came, the skull grinned at the banquet much earlier, at the very dawn of our existence in the hunter-gatherer era. We realized, oh my God, we're gonna die. But does that sound like a scene from the movie? It is. We're gonna die. But stay close, friends. It's subtle, it's deep, it's wild, it's beautiful. And the first shock of existence, it's the death of the human being. But what happens when we realize the first shock of existence? What happens? Anybody? We're pressed inside. Death creates life. It's only, wrote Rilke, right, when I come face to face naked before death, that I'm born. It's only death that turns life into a genuine option. Oscar Wilde, right, understood very well when he wrote The Picture of Dorian Gray, that Dorian Gray, who lives forever, becomes degraded and becomes corrupt because he never chooses. And death creates a scenario, a simulation in which we choose. And in choice is our dignity. And in the freedom of our will, not absolute freedom, doesn't mean we can do anything or choose anything. It doesn't mean we're not determined in part by antecedent causes that set the stage, but there's a dimension of the human being which is not reducible. Not just of the human being, there's a dimension even in the world of life, but it comes to full bloom in the human being where we choose. And when we confront the skull that grins at the banquet, then we choose for the first time. That's why death is so important. So I'm going to tell you a secret. It's unlikely that most of us on this call are going to be here in 30 years from now. Some of us will. Unlikely that most of us will. Right? 40 years just went down. And I have a little secret for you, friends. It's going to go by in a second. It's going to go by in a freaking second. And then it's over. Or is it? Because actually, when we go inside, when we step inside, then we go to the one place where we have access to wisdom, to information, to gnosis. Just like the mathematician goes inside the depths of his own capacity, right, to imagine, but not imagine in the childlike sense. God is a figment of our imagination, but our imagination is a figment of God. The mathematician deploys imagination as Al-Farabi, as particularly, right, the great masters of Sufism and Kashmir Shaivism and the esoterics of Hebrew wisdom talked about it. I imagine means that actually I have the capacity to imagine the interior of reality. And when I imagine the interior of reality and I come face to face with death, I realize it's not all over in one lifetime. Death is real. Death demands that we choose. Death is the simulation of reality. And we take it seriously. And we do everything we can to live and to live gorgeously and to live deeply and live with radical meaning. But the first shock of existence, the realization of death presses us inside and activates our ascension, activates our descent into the depths, activates our gnosis, activates our knowing, activates what we call our anthro-ontological knowing. Anthro, human being, like anthropology. Ontological, for reals, is what we really know. Anthro-ontology is the great new field, which we're developing at the center, and together with my friend Howard Bloom at his institute, he calls it omnology, but it's the same thing. And Howard's kind of the kind of, if you will, the guru of NASA, who's a science, right, dear friend, and we're working together. And just anthro-ontology is what we know when we go inside. So when we go inside and we confront the first shock of existence, the death of the human being, right, we actually, from that place, create new knowledge. We create all of culture and all of the great traditions and all of the interior sciences, right, and all of, right, the best of the religions and the best, right, of the deepest wisdom structures, right, in every dimension, in every era of existence, that all come together and tell us that it's not over when it's over, that death is a night between two doors. But we can't avoid the first shock. Right? The first shock of existence is real, and we have to actually not engage in what Ernest Becker called the denial of death, but to actually face death and let death breathe life into us as we find our way to the continuity of consciousness. And we make completely different choices than we otherwise would have made because our worldview, our superstructure has changed. We have a new worldview. And we actually begin to understand that every choice we make and every move we make, right, is not about my position on the chessboard of rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose matrix. And even though I pretend it's not that, that's actually what drives me. But actually every move I make, right, is actually creating the next dimension, my continuity of consciousness. It's writing the script of my next story, right? Wow. And so I dip my quill into the ink of value. I dip my quill into the ink of first principles and first values embedded in a story of value. And I realize that my story is not isolated. It's not alone. My story participates in a larger story. That actually the universe is a story. The universe is a love story. Evolution is the love story of the universe, not as a declaration, not as a quaint idea, right? Not as a fundamentalist claim, not as a new age claim, but it's actually the best take on the sciences that we have.